Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Kodiak Shack podcast. I have Pako Benitez from a lot of stuff, the merge and working at Shield AI. So we'll get to talking to him in a second. Thanks again for listening, and then remember, or actually don't remember because it's the first time I'm telling you, we now are able to accept donations. So if you'd like, in the show notes, you can click the link. It'll take you to our red circle donations, and then anything can help just keep this podcast from being exceptionally expensive to produce. But overall, we appreciate anything you're able to provide. So Pako, thanks for being on the podcast. And so go ahead and tell us about yourself. It's not a trap.
It's not a trap. Well, thanks for having me, Vader. So I've recently retired, 25 years in the military, 17 in the Air Force, 8 in the Marine Corps. That's a story for a different day. Strike Eagle background, weapons school grad, did assignments, overseas, obviously, 5 deployments, about 250 combat missions in the Strike Eagle as a backseater. Did time in the Pentagon. I did time in Congress, working for a senator. So it's another war story there. That is a war zone on itself.
Yeah.
Did some time at DARPA and did some time in Silicon Valley, and ended up my last assignment in an operational test down in Florida.
Whew.
That's me.
That's you got a storied background. You've done a lot of different things. What would you say, out of all of your military experience, what was the thing you were like, that was a cool experience that I did not expect?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I have to get back with you, actually.
All right, yeah, we'll bring it back around.
Yeah,
because I feel like
end.
All right, because so much of what, at least in my experience, and then tell me if this is similar. There are a lot of things you go fly fighters, you go do stuff, and you're like, you expect it to be cool, and turns out most of the time it's cool. But then there's a lot of things that you get into that you're like, oh man, like I'm the wedge on this one, or I ended up drawing the short straw. And then in the end of it, you're like, man, that was a better experience than I expected.
Yeah, experiences. There are lots of them. I like to say that I've somehow managed to cram several lifetimes of experiences in a short 25-year span.
I think that's the way to. That's the way to do it, though. Because I feel like, in my experience, there's been a lot of times where having had these experiences helps me have a better perspective moving forward. So you get, whether it's about the organization you're working with or for or whatever, you gain experiences and then you have a better perspective moving forward. And then when you're, when I was a young captain, like I knew all the answers, everybody was wrong and I was right. And now
just
I'm
like
older.
My kids.
Yeah. Well, and then you grow up and you're like, oh, I get it. Like I'm so uninformed that I know that I don't even know. Well, that's great. So you started the merge, and what kind of prompted you to do that? What was something that you were like, this needs to happen and I'm going to be the guy?
Yeah. So I have I'm not a tech, I'm not an engineering background. I have a degree in basket weaving, bachelor's and master's in basket weaving. But I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express with some assignments in technology and interacting with a lot of tech, as we do in the Air Force, kind of a tech-centric service. And so kind of got interested in the technological aspects of solving problems. So there's some problems you can't out-tactic your way to a solution. So that's kind of how I got started. And what had happened was, as I was trying to learn more about the space, is I found out it was really, really hard to sort through all of the chaff that's out there for as far as defense news reporting, to find the nuggets that I had cared about. So the things that for instance, the things I do not care about is a uniform change, or a commander got fired, or a tattoo policy. Who? I don't care. I do not care. But turns out a lot of the defense reporting outlets, are just, most of it is that kind of stuff that you just have to really sort through. So I started consolidating stuff and building kind of a way to sort through that every day. And, I started thinking, I was like, I clearly cannot be the only person who wants this, but there isn't a solution out there. And so I said, well, COVID had hit, and I decided to learn a little bit as a hobby and pick up writing a newsletter. So that's how it started. And I try to, it's serious stuff, but don't take it too seriously.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I think that's the best kind of content, where you get a lot of good information, but you don't get bogged down in it because it's it is going to be some intense information. I actually think, because you also work for War on the Rocks, right? You're a producer there, or
Editor, contributing editor.
editor.
Yeah, so I've been there for probably 4, 5, 6 years now. It's been a while. Yeah.
Well, I think it was them. Trace and I were talking about this, and I think it was Trace. But either way, there was an article, the standard like, oh, the sky is falling, they're retiring the Raptor, the Raptor's dead. And then I think that War on the Rocks actually put the article out, and they were like, hey, the reality is that, and then it kind of explained the true nature of it. So the whole, everyone freaking out. And then it turns out it was, 10% truth, which is pretty standard in the fighter community. So, yeah, so that's good. I think that's great, because I think it's an interesting time where we have a problem of too much content. We have too much information that's we're able to get information from, and locations to get that back. So it's good to be able to synthesize that into useful information. Because like you said, oh, sweet, I can have tattoos on my forearms and hands now. It's like, okay, what else is new? Well, that's great. So then when did you start working at Shield AI?
I've only been working there for probably a month and a half or so.
Okay, nice. So that's pretty new.
Yeah, but so I was doing some, my last, 6 months or so, I was doing some consulting work as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I had done some work for several companies, and they were one of them. And then it was a good run to get under the hood and actually look at some companies, what they were doing, what's actually real, what's not. And at the end of the day, I wanted to continue serving, not wearing uniforms. So I definitely wanted to stay in defense tech. I wanted to work on a focus and a mission area that I thought had a huge upside in the future, especially the next 10 years. And then lastly, probably the most important, is I wanted to pick the winning horse. And so that's you combine those three, and that's kind of where I landed.
So can you explain to me why it seems like almost Mad Lib style that AI is like all used across the board? Like everybody has AI. Like why is AI such a universal tool? Obviously artificial intelligence, but why is it so frequently used? Is it just like the hot button term right now that people like, or is it everybody's using some form of AI to produce these products?
Yeah, it really just comes to data decisions, right? So this is going to sound, this is kind of weird, because the name of the company that I work for is Shield AI. I actually don't like the term AI. I prefer to speak it in references of autonomy, because AI, I think, is a pretty loaded word, not just for the buzzword that it's become the past few years, especially, but when you say artificial intelligence and you say that to 10 people, instinctively there's 10 different things that they're thinking of, and none of them are probably the thing that you're actually talking about. And so whether you think if it's like something out of Terminator or whatever, or something in a movie that you saw, Vader, you'd probably know this, how many military movies do you see and you go, no, that's not real, like hey, that's a Reaper with a jet engine, like that's not real, like things exactly. Like that,
pretty much every movie.
That's the same thing with when you use the term artificial intelligence. So I prefer to speak it in terms of autonomy. So it's helping automate things. And there's levels of autonomy, points of autonomy, and degrees of autonomy. So those are kind of the three ways that I think about it. So in the Vader flying the Viper, your airplane would not take off without autonomy, because you have a digital flight control system. And so that is the point of autonomy. The level of autonomy, you think of it as levels like 1 through 5. That's like level 1, level 2 kind of autonomy. It's automating some things and it's making some decisions based on inputs, right? Like that is a very rudimentary form of AI, if you wanted to think it in those terms, right? So that's like your level 1, level 2 kind of autonomy. If I use that flight control computer example in the F-16, and now that's the point of autonomy, and now I dial up the level of autonomy. And so when you get to like of the 5 levels, after you get past level 3, level 4, level 5 is non-deterministic, which means it's making decisions when there's a few different ways that it could arrive at those decisions, right? And trained to make decisions. And so instead of being able to keep the aircraft stable so you can provide inputs, that same example, maybe a level 5 autonomy would be creating outputs. So it's actually maneuvering the aircraft based on the environment. So that's the kind of the difference of how you would dial that. Now you have degrees of autonomy, which is I've got an operator that is in the loop. I've got an operator that could be on the loop, or an operator that's off the loop. He's not even involved. And so that's kind of the three basic ways that you could apply that to so many different things. A radar. When you flew the Viper and you are working your radar, it's doing some things in the background for processing for autonomy, like level 1 autonomy. Like your level 3 autonomy might be sanitize this airspace, and it's managing its own footprint, search volumes to sanitize that. And great. And maybe your level 4, level 5 autonomy is it's doing everything and it's just telling you about your environment. So you don't even need to know what it's looking for. It's sensing stuff. It's looking for things like, hey, I haven't looked in this area for a while. I'm going to go put my sensor back over there and update that. And so that's stale data. Now I'm going to refresh my essay. So that's kind of the difference between that. And you could pick anything that applies to. Now, and I use that example because that's kind of what we're focused on in the company I work for now. But you can apply that same thing for maintenance. Right. So level 1 autonomy for logistics is, hey, these things are here. We're going to order them. And it automatically, when I buy something from Walmart, it reorders it online. When you scan something at checkout, it automatically sends the order into replace. Your level 4, level 5 autonomy is Amazon. So Amazon, as you have the screen up, I don't know how people know this, but when you have the screen up, when you're moving your mouse, it's actually tracking where you're moving your mouse on the screen. And it is automatically moving things to your geographic location based on the things that you're interested in to shorten the delivery time. So this isn't in your checkout, this isn't paying for, it's literally you scrolling a screen and where you're moving your mouse and how long you've stayed static on a screen. If you're reading a product review, it's actually moving things to your geographic area, even if you don't buy it. And so that's the kind of different levels of automation that you can think of. So you can call it AI if you want. I prefer degrees of autonomy.
Yeah, my wife's probably costing Amazon a fortune because she leaves stuff in her shopping cart for months. That's a really good way to look at it because I am definitely the caveman in the fighter pilot squadron. So I'm not the tech guy. People are always surprised at how bad I am at it, and it probably shows in my video and audio editing. But that's really good. And what it made me think about was auto GCAS, so the auto ground avoidance or collision avoidance system, which is in the F-16. I believe it's in the F-35. So where would that fall in that? So I guess explaining auto GCAS is an F-16 is flying. It knows via GPS where it is over the ground, and then it knows via DTED, which is effectively the elevation of that ground, that the jet will require more than 5 Gs to recover to not hit the ground. And the jet actually takes over and then will recover the jet to level flight. So where does that fall in that autonomy? Is that where it jumps up to a level 5 because it's actually an output?
I would say that's probably a level 3, maybe a little bit level 4. And the reason I say that is because although it's got an output, the difference is that output is based off of a known parameter, right? So, and one of the reasons is because auto GCAS, there's a lot of trust involved in that system, right? That system was actually ready to be deployed on the F-16 10 years before it was. Yeah. And the reason it didn't is because of trust. So one of the things that the auto GCAS systems have is, you can go look in your Dash 1, it'll tell you what it's going to do, right? So it's predetermined what the maneuver it's going to do. So it's going to go, I'm going to use my attitude indicator, and I'm going to nearest direction to get the sunny side up, and I'm going to pull this many Gs with wings level for this much time to climb to this altitude. And I go, okay, that is kind of a script, right? Yeah. So although the inputs and stuff are complicated, and it is actually maneuvering the jet, but it's and I don't know if the F-16 is a little bit different, but the EX has something like that too, where it's predetermined where it's going to go and the parameters that it operates in, right? if you were to apply, now say you apply your auto GCAS into a area that was, like a city with skyscrapers. Okay, so now DTED doesn't work because it's man-made things, and the nearest direction to avoid hitting something may not be up, it may be to the side. So that's where you would start, based on the environment, it would determine which way to go to save you. That's kind of the difference between the two.
I see. That makes sense. And that's it's good that we're getting it. And I think it's unfortunate that we obviously lose, people and aircraft pretty much every year due to kind of CFIT, controlled flight into terrain. So it's great that these programs are coming out, but it's definitely a glove save. Primary, secondary, and tertiary should be the pilots and their flight mates and crews doing the right thing. But it's good that those things exist. So if you could give us again for the cavemen out here, Shield AI, they're kind of 30,000 foot view. Like, what are they trying to tackle? What is their biggest problem set that they're trying to solve?
Ooh, okay. There's a lot of artificial intelligence companies that are in this space in defense, and most of them are doing all different things. And because, like you said, AI has a lot of applications. What Shield AI is focused on is AI for maneuver and edge processing AI. So we take something, think of it like a Group 5 RPA or drone. So think of it like a jet-powered drone, right? Okay. With a brain on it that's making cognitive decisions like a human pilot would, but there's no human pilot. And it's taking in sensor data and using that to inform its decision space. The decision space is informed by an EM diagram, operating limits, training rules, and the operating environment, the threat models from NASIC, MISIC, missile threat data. So it's you're training a behavior to do something that's human-like, that cognition without the human.
That's so I feel like that seems like pretty high level and just difficult things to kind of do. Do you see a lot of times where, because again, like we have tactics built and procedures built over years and years and years of humans flying it. Do you see that the majority of time the AI is following what we would view as like a normal execution, or does the AI kind of go what we would consider wild dingo, but still get to the same end result?
Yes, no, and maybe. So I can tell you, I can share a little bit. So there's a lot of different approaches to deploy that autonomous behavior, and how you build the behavior determines some of those excursions. So there's what we call like a pure RL model, where it's all reinforcement learning. So you give it very little left-right limits. It starts doing stuff, and it's trained on a neural network. You deploy it in a simulated environment, and it's learning how to do stuff. So we have an agent. We call them agents. We have an agent that an F-16 agent that is the world's best dogfighter. Like no human can beat it. We actually have to dial it down and inject a bunch of noise into it so people don't die as fast. But it's unbeatable. And it's great now, but again, that was built over a little bit of time and the architecture approach to do that. But as that was being built, you told it to win, but you didn't give it any constraints. And one of the things that the model would do is it would, as it went to the merge, it saw turning room at the merge as opportunity, and it would basically bunt, zero out the line of sight, shoot the gun, kill the bandit it was merging with, and then like have a midair. Like, well, you did kill the bandit, but you also want to stay alive. So we had to put some controls in to okay, when you're going to the merge, you want to optimize for some turning room, so then you can have a post-merge maneuver. And so, okay, now I know what you want me to do. It's like having the world's dumbest wingman, and you have to at the beginning, you're like, why did you do that? Well, you didn't tell me not to. True, don't do that. And so you start with most of the time the solution becomes kind of a hybrid solution. So there's some parts where you want to use kind of a neural network to train these little subroutines for reinforcement learning. And there's some things that you just want to tell it to do. It's very scripted. Like when you're doing for instance, like I don't need artificial intelligence to do a long range commit. Like the mechanics are pretty well known. There's a reason why you do them. Great. All you have to do is tell it commit. This is what you do when you commit. And it does, these 4 mechanics. And so it's basically optimized to do those 4 mechanics the best every time. When you do things like, when you make a tactical decision, like what formation should I be in? Like, okay, well, it depends. And so it's cool about my job. It's like being in a fighter squadron when, but all the wingmen are the software engineers that are building these behaviors. And it turns out it's a lot of fun, but it's I like to say it's easier to teach our software engineers how to be fighter pilots than to teach how to build AI for fighter pilots.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a tough part because there's this big gap between people who understand the desired learning objectives or just our objectives in the fighter space, and there's people who understand how to program it, and being able to bridge that gap and like say the words that make sense to an engineer to get the end result for the fighter pilot. I always tell my buddy Tron, he's a computer science engineer, got his master's in it. So he speaks both languages though. So he can write programs and do all these things. And he's a fighter pilot, so he understands this stuff. Would you say, so one of the things I always wonder about when it comes to AI or these kind of autonomous execution is what is the assumption for data gaps? So, like all of us, we lose sight, lose the fight. So if AI doesn't have like high fidelity data, does it go into effectively like a really good coast mode or inertial rates, or, what does it do then?
That is a really great question. So the process of training a behavior, right? Just like if you didn't know any better and, you lost sight, your instinct is that you would ease off the G, like, oh, what happened, right? When really your instinct should be tighten down and figure it out in about 10 seconds. Because I don't know where he is, but I know if I keep turning, I'll create angular problems and maybe some closure. And that's the best of the worst situation, right? Yeah. Well, the same thing with an agent. When you're training an agent early on, like it needs good data to develop behaviors. And now it's incentivized to do those behaviors. You can start removing some of that data and then that uncertainty, and you can change the operating environment too. So we have a program we're working on where basically it's an IADS, and it's like swarming munitions, like think swarming cruise missiles through IADS hitting targets. And some of those SAMs are in the script. Some of them are pop-up targets, and some of the targets beyond the IADS are dynamic targets. And so when the environment changes, or what do I need to do to get clarity on the tactical problem I'm trying to solve? So we build for that, and then, like I said, because it has that maturity, when you start removing that information, it has enough insights to continue doing what it thinks is the best thing.
And then I guess after the fact, you can look at it, and just like we learn in the debrief, you can kind of reward some of those. Hey, you made a good real-time decision here versus that was probably not the best. Or is that too dynamic and too nebulous of an environment to make?
No, that's what's really great is we, once we kind of bound the problem, like here, like don't hit the ground, don't have a midair, hit the merge, and you bound the problem a little bit. Then what we can do is, we dial up the learning. And so we'll run, 1 million scenarios a day to train the behavior. And so, click the button, go home, come in the next day. Engineers bring it up. Okay, what did it do? What did it learn overnight? And sometimes, there's some interesting excursions, and you're like, it's actually developed its own tactic. Like, let's see if and it actually works pretty good. Like, okay, interesting. Sometimes it does something, and you go, don't do that. So with reinforcement learning, you basically are de-emphasizing the things you don't want to do, and you're trying to reinforce and prioritize the things you do want it to do. So that's kind of the way that we approach that. And as the missions and the programs that we're in get, the growth of complexity is exponential. We actually started with a quadcopter back in probably 6-7 years ago now. And we moved to a quadcopter that's deployed with SOCOM. So we've had the company's had AI on quadcopters deployed since 2018. Wow. So it's not new. how it's being applied might be new to some parts of flying, but it's been doing things and solving problems for a while. But I say that to say, like, there's still a long way to go. Trust trust in the tech is has to follow demonstrated performance. We're actually going to have some things live flying this year on F-16 and some other platforms to demonstrate autonomy. Like, it's making its own decisions and maneuvering the aircraft. So it's an exciting year. It's gonna be a really exciting year.
That's really cool. I'm looking forward to hearing more, kind of what comes out of all that. One question, obviously being a Viper dude. So is it like a Block 50? Like, what are they using for their BFM F-16?
It's a Lockheed F-16 model.
Oh, okay. So just there's of the...
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different types of F-16 models. It's like one of the most common ones that is used in the R&D field because it has enough detail, but it has a lot of commonality and kind of cross-platform application. So it's easy to train a behavior on that. And what's interesting is, you can train it so it understands the maneuvers and stuff, and the extensibility of a behavior is you go, okay, now I'm going to put a different aircraft model in it. You go, okay, so now, an F-15 flies way different than an F-16.
Yeah.
And so that transferability, okay, now it has to learn how to do some things all over again, but the basics of why it's trying to do things is the same, right? Like the concepts of BFM and an F-16 and an F-15 are the same.
Yeah.
Like they're the basics are the same. So those fundamentals, just like when you switch airplanes and you're taking that knowledge from the F-16 with you, and you go, oh, it's just like the F-16 except this. Oh, it's just like what I'm used to except that. And so you're applying, the experiences you have behind you to kind of solve the problems in front of you.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And it's again, not being a computer guy, like hearing those things, you're like, that's amazing. It is beyond my even comprehension that we're able to do.
Yeah, it's also wicked hard. And we have some really smart people that love doing it. And so, we're fighting over, the fight for talent isn't really between, so much like the primes and the startups like us, but it's the, Tesla, they have autopilot, right? So it's the same kind of models and architectures that kind of go into that. And what do you want to do? You want to have an autopilot for a car? Or you want to put AI on an F-16? Like, what do you want to do? So that's kind of it's been awesome to see, and most of our engineers are really young, so we recruit from some top tier universities, and I was at Langley Air Force Base earlier this week. Actually, we had two of our engineers that are building some behaviors for one of our programs, and they had never been on a military base. So we were going to go to Langley Air Force Base, and so we took them out the flight line. Had never seen a fighter jet before, and so it's a really I'm having a really good time so far at my new job. It's kind of takes me back to, like, you see the interactions and that teaching. It's like teaching you were an instructor in the Viper before you left, right?
Yep. Yeah,
so think of it as like you have your students in the brief, and you say, okay, you're going to go do this, and they go, okay, and then you tell them, here, this is why you're going to do it, or when this happens, do this. Here's how you do it. Okay. Well, for the software engineers, they go, okay, well, why? Well, because of this. When this happens, this is why you would want to do that. Like, yeah, but why? Like, well, because of this other thing. Okay, but why? You get like 3 whys deep into every decision. And that's the nugget of info that they actually need to build a reinforcement learning model to train these behaviors. So being able to, like, I was on a meeting yesterday, and I was explaining a commit and a crank. And it was like a 1-hour discussion of, like, a commit, a shoot, and crank. And when would I crank? And all the different types of cranks. And which one would I use, hit this one and that one. And so getting to that level of explainability, so the software engineer can go back, okay, I know I need to optimize for this. I had a meeting I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and it was about turning around, teaching building an agent to turn around. There's some Air Force programs and stuff we're working on, and like, okay, like, And you think about it, there's like 7 different types of maneuvers that you would do. It's like about 7 or so. Like, well, I can do like an energy sustaining level turn. I could do a kind of a slice back. I could do just a, 40, like a instrument level turn. I can do a split S. So there's all different ways that I can turn around. I can do, a pitch up or a slice back, right? So I can go up or down. When would I use all of those maneuvers and why? And so going through and explaining like this, in this situation, the fastest way you want to turn around is do a split S. Like, this is what it costs. You optimize for this, but your trade-off is you lose that. And so having that kind of detail to then, again, build a neural network to train a behavior to make the decision. So I just say, turn around, target that guy, and based on the environment, so whether it's risk to mission, risk to force, where it's at, it will make the decision to choose which maneuver it wants to do.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And it's one of the things that, again, talking to my buddy Tron about it, because he kind of sees things that way, and you can't kind of have a surface level understanding or a surface level explanation and write code off of that, because it's not specific enough. You need, like you said, to like 3 or 4 levels deep to the true thing that's trying to be accomplished, because that's what they have to code, rather than, like you said, it ends up just being like a rote maneuver that it's like, just do this maneuver. And it's like, well, it can't make decisions off of that because it just does the thing that it was told to do.
Yeah, so you can see in that example, there's like, those maneuvers themselves are like low levels of autonomy, right? But they're built into this kind of decision tree architecture that uses kind of a hybrid of that, deterministic and non-deterministic decisions, if you will, or outputs. So that's why you can say turn around, and then it picks one, and now you're trying to debrief it. Hey, why did you do a pitch back, and why did you do this instead of that? Why'd you turn left versus turn right? Like, interesting. Like, I didn't thought about that. Oh, we didn't give it enough data to make what we would consider the best decision, right? And then sometimes it do something and surprise you. Oh, you ever been to one example? You ever fly and you go, hey, when this happens, wingman, I want you to turn left, and then an hour and a half later you're airborne, and the thing that you briefed, that when this happens, turn left, and he turns right, and you go, what are you doing? You don't go, you know what? There's something wrong in your brain. Like, clearly you're an idiot, and you're no good. I don't trust you. Like, that's not what happens with the human, right? You come back and you debrief it. Yeah. And sometimes you go, it's perception, decision, or execution errors, right? Like, PDE. So what did you perceive was going on here? And you know this, the amount of things as a flight leader instructor that you learn in the debrief that you didn't know is amazing. You're like, well, I perceived this, and then the instructor, that's not what I perceived. Okay, so we have a disconnect in perception between the two of us. Let's look at the facts, see which one of us is more correct, and then we'll figure out where that disconnect came from. Sometimes the wingman's right, and his decision was right because it was a misunderstanding of the situation from the flight lead. And sometimes it's the other way around. And so having that, I call it post-mission rationality. So the ability to go debrief the behavior and go, why did he do that? You have to have that explainability. Otherwise, you're never going to trust it, right? So that wingman that you said go right and he turned left, or vice versa, if you never had a debrief and could never talk to him about why he did that, you're like, hey, don't fly with that guy. He might turn right, he might turn left. I don't know.
Yeah. And
so having that debrief ability is a fundamental part of ever getting this stuff out of the R&D phase and into the field.
Yeah, I think that's, I spent my last 3 years as an instructor at the FTU. And
so
it's almost that
I did some FTU time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like an entirely different animal. You go through, you're an instructor pilot, you show up and they're like, hey, you need to do another upgrade because these kids are, it's just different.
There's a reason there's a separate upgrade for teaching at the FTU.
Yeah, well, and it's good because just like explaining things to an engineer, you have to be as specific and deliberate with your words as possible, just like with a B courser. And I think that's where the thing, like you said, the debrief and getting data back out is super important, because there are students out there that I assume most of us have seen where you're like, what were you thinking here? Or what were you looking at? And they're like, I don't remember. And it's just always, it's almost like some rote response, and like, I don't remember, I don't know. And you're like, all right, I'm losing trust in you.
You're going into your seer circle. I don't know.
Exactly.
I'm hungry.
Well, and you just like, it's almost like they just are like, if I say nothing, at least I can't get more in trouble. And you're like, that's not
right.
the way to learn. Like, you need the data back and forth. And if you're messing up, we need to know, because that's how we fix it, So that's good that is kind of flowing into the AI, and hopefully all of our development across a lot of programs is the feedback loop, the ability to come up with an idea, try to execute it, and then learn from the execution to hopefully make it better the next time, or we're probably not going to make progress, or not great progress if we do.
Yep, absolutely.
One of the things that getting into flying fighters and everything, I didn't realize that there could be other problem sets that I would find interesting outside the jet. Like, I was like, oh man. And what I found is the innovation space is full of problem sets that I'm like, that's really cool. That's very interesting to me. And it piques my interest, just like a tactical problem or flying jets. I assume you found something similar in the space with just the problem sets you get to see and work on.
Yeah, my last assignment I really loved, because I worked at the wing level for the wing commander, and I was a director of staff, so you're probably familiar with that. My plaque that I got when I left, it basically says, you are the world's worst director of staff. That's what my plaque says. Yes. And the reason was, while the wing had a director of staff position, that's the position I was in, I did no directing of staff. That was not what I did. I basically was the director of strategy and innovation for the wing. And so a lot of the stuff we're doing was, it's very, very sensitive, very classified stuff, but we're able to go around and see finding opportunities across the portfolios of programs for Air Combat Command and Global Strike, and create some synergies and all the other buzzwords. I don't want to bore you with that, but finding those wicked problems and like, hey, here's how we think we can solve it. And here's like, we can solve it this way, we can solve it that way. Let's, like, if we go big and we solve this problem, we'll win in a big way. If we just try to make these incremental changes, it'll be a problem for the next guy in 2 or 3 years. Like, this will not fix itself. So going after those wicked problems, and we had some wins. So one of the things, I'll tell you one thing I'm proud of. There's a few things I did there, but one of them I'm proud of is Black Flag. You ever heard of Black Flag?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so you have Red Flag. Everyone knows Red Flag. That is training. So operational units go to Nellis. They have training, large force type stuff. Think mission commander rides. You probably checkered flag. There's a green flag. There's actually a blue flag. There's all different flag level events. But one thing that the Air Force didn't have was a operationally focused large force test event. So what we do is we would spend all this money buying this technology, and then we develop tactics and some integration with some of the stuff that we have, whether it's software updates, hardware updates, but we don't ever put them in a large force, like, stress test, deep end testing environment to see, like, does it really work, or how can we use this in like real life? Because it's not going to be 2 jets flying around. It's going to be 20 or 200. Like, how is this going to work? And we kind of went to bat with that. And what we said is, red flag without actual, like, data informed tactics and integration. Things like Red Flag is not advanced training, it's advanced trying. Like, you're literally making things up, and it may work at a Red Flag, but that's not real. And the data that you're getting for a Red Flag debrief is not actually good enough to validate tactics. And so there's a whole different level of instrumentation and data discovery that has to happen. And so Black Flag was created to solve that. And so that was kind of my things I'm pretty proud of. And so we were able to actually build a wedge in the Air Force budget every year, so it has money in perpetuity, if you will. We don't have to go with our hat in hand. So we built a budget process for that, and it's got several $1 million a year just dedicated to the things that are going to be fielded to the warfighter in the next 3 to 4 years. Like, how are we going to integrate this so when it hits the fleet, you already know what you're going to do and what the capabilities and limitations of any new thing that we get.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because I agree. I've sat in a red flag debrief where you spend millions of dollars on this day of training between the pilots and all the, the aircraft and the flying and all the support people will go into it. And then you'll get like DFPs and you'll get some kind of feedback. And at the end of it, you're like, well, that's not the reality because this threat wouldn't be that easily defeated, or, it's not just one of them there, and all these kind of problems that we can't replicate because it's too expensive to replicate everything exactly the right way. So that's good that they're going beyond that step. And then, like you said, rather than just like stovepiping in, it's like, oh, this works really well in a lab, like making it do, okay, this is where you're going to be asked to execute. Can you still do the thing you say you can do in there? So I think that's awesome. I'd like to go fly in one of those if it's for us air breathers.
We most of them were done at Nellis or Edwards, or we actually combine the airspace. We have a big airspace between the two, and then we actually team up with our the developmental test community. They have an event at Edwards called Orange Flag, which is kind of test card. It's large force test, but it's kind of test card event driven. And so I've got all these assets in the same airspace. Like what can I do to leverage the systems of these different aircraft? And it's a lot of great data coming out of that. And the differences being like at Nellis for Black Flag. You mentioned your experience at Red Flag. So you'd say you have your DFPs and your scenarios are all driven by off of desired learning objectives. And anyone who's spent any time around anything large force, the first thing that happens is you have competing interests for desired learning objectives. And so, don't fight the scenario. We're going to do this. We're going to create this stupid scenario that makes no sense because I need to show this kind of problem to get a learning event, right? And then how that learning event goes is your debrief focus point. Whereas in operational tests for Black Flag, we said, okay, get rid of all of that. All we have is desired test objectives. So we could all die and we have a valid test. We could all win and we could have an invalid test. And so what we wanted to do is make it test objective driven and then build a scenario to meet those test objectives. So it wasn't about learning and it wasn't about winning. It's about getting the right data.
Yeah, I think, and that sadly, that should be our goal in a Red Flag. Like I've seen it, and I assume you've seen it over the years. Like you go to a Red Flag and then you spend literally 12 hours, one whole day, mission planning for the next day. And there's, handful to 20 people in the room. And then you have a white force, which is the team that's kind of managing the scenario from the other side or just the overall scenario. And the problem is you put in these RFIs or requests for information, and you can always tell when you either ask the question that they haven't thought of yet, or you ask the right question, which is going to kind of like unlock the Rubik's Cube of the problem. And they're like, we can't tell you that. And you're like, if we should feasibly be able to get this information, you're not going to give it to me because it's going to ruin your game to give me training. And you're like, we've like gotten into this like death spiral of like, no, this is for your training. That's why you can't do your full up thing. And you're like, this is just frustrating now. It's you're making bad learning objectives. It almost
and I'd say the value of Red Flag like these days is like being honest, just geographically constrained, the threat density. There's just certain things you're like today you cannot do. You just won't be able to. Or there's sensitive things that you don't want to. I don't want to flip the switch, or I don't want to fly with that asset. Or there's all kinds of things like because everyone is watching now from space. And so you think of Red Flag as it's a good way to get weight off wheels on a lot of things and stress test you. It's mostly administrative, but stress testing you in a way airborne that you probably can't get anywhere else with that kind of density of aircraft and that airspace maneuvering and just, the overwhelming part of the radios. And so there is the live fly aspect, like it is critical. But you're right. That's not. it's not the 10 mission, then the 10 missions that you're going to do aren't going to be realistic anyways for a whole bunch of reasons like we just talked about. And so a lot of that stuff is going to actually happen either completely in the sim with physics-based modeling in a sim, or it's going to be done live virtual constructive, which is probably going to be the future. So instead of launching an op4, maybe my op4 is all, virtual or constructive being pushed. And so I can see them, 100, 200 miles in front of me. There's really no one out there. But to all of my systems and everything, obviously if I get close enough and I, use my Mark 1 eyeball, there's nothing there. But beyond visual range, it all looks the same because you can't see it physically. Your sensors are telling you it's there. So if you can inject that, that's the kind of the future.
Yeah, I love doing red flags. I mean, red flag Nellis, red flag Alaska, like they are some of my favorite things, mainly because everybody's in the room. And we've all been at those times where you're at your squadron, you're in like the third month straight of your missionized scenarios, and you're like, cool, this notional asset is over here, and they're going to be doing this good work, and this notional asset's here, and this notional asset's pushing there, and they're all fake, and you just kind of hand wave them, and then you move on, and nobody cares about them. And all that does is create, again, bad learning objectives, but this is like at the squadron level on the day-to-day. And now you don't have a realistic, like, what is my striker's actual tactic? Like, what do I have to assume my striker will do as a default so I know if that's accurate or not? Or what will my escort be doing? So I found between red flag Alaska, red flag Nellis, going to Guam and doing Cope North, there was a lot of cool stuff in the fact that you would be standing there across the table and saying, like, what is your tactic? What are you going to execute today? So I think they're great for that. And like you said, being like the pink body in the aircraft, flying around in a, if you're lucky, 4,000 foot block with 4 aircraft, 2,000 foot block is more realistic. And you have to make it work, and you have to actually execute and be safe and stay in your block and defend as best as you can without making dangerous situations, and just like nonstop radio calls. And you have to like find that little gap in the radio calls to make your radio call. And I think that's good, because I think that helps, if nothing else, the fog and friction that you're going to experience in a real war. I think that's, I mean, it's fun. It's fun to be the dude flying around in there. But I think you're right. And that is probably going the way of the dodo, and there's going to be less and less.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy? Think about this. It's 2022. Like there's a red flag, I think, going on this week, actually. That red flag in 2022, they're using a single UHF frequency to communicate between this large force package, which is the same technology that we used in, the 1960s.
Yeah.
Like, it has not changed at all. The aircraft changed, but the way we actually communicate, and we have data link and stuff, but overwhelmingly a single UHF frequency.
Yeah. And you think, like, if you just explain it to anyone who hasn't been there, even anybody who's been there, they're like, that sounds insane. You're like, yeah, no, I agree. It does sound insane. Like that's, but it's kind of fun, in doing that. So kind of shifting gears, you said you worked at the Pentagon for a while. What were you doing over there?
So I worked in the legislative liaison office. So I was my portfolio is basically fighters and munitions, except for nuclear stuff. And I was the person in the Pentagon for the Air Force that would go to Congress and engage the offices and the committees, the armed services committees in the House and the Senate on those portfolio programs. And as my additional duty, which is kind of funny, the way that the deals are structured is that I was also the legislative liaison for the JPO for F-35. So my additional duty was do all the F-35 congressional stuff. So no one's interested in the F-35 on the Hill, right?
Yeah.
And so I was doing that and the Air Force stuff. So I did that for a while. Really interesting assignment. It's one of those cross-functional assignments. I like to say we're the most powerful action officers in the building, because we have access to all the senior leaders. We, make sure that we, here's what these people are interested in. Here's why they're asking. Like, here's their equities. All politics are local, so you got to understand that. And you got to understand why they're asking the questions, so we can go and have a fruitful conversation. So, hey, I'm interested in learning more about, F-16. Like, radars. Like, okay, like why? Like, I just want to make sure we get the right answer. Oh, it turns out like the plant in Maryland that actually makes the radars, the mod line, is in your district. So now you instantly care because there's a lot of jobs and a lot of money coming into your district. Okay, great. So like those types of connections, and then there's certain things that things that aren't in a budget, for instance, like future stuff in the programming side, like future years programming, that's outside of the scope of like congressional oversight. So there's certain things we don't like. Hey, we're not going to talk to Congress about this stuff because that is not. It's pre-decisional until OSD approves it, and really OMB, which is the budgeting part for the White House, because there are different branches of government. So we got to be very cognizant about that. If it's a like approved thing we're doing in this branch of government, we can talk to the other branch of government about it. If it's something that's pre-decisional, hey, we're thinking about this, we're thinking about that, or hey, we're doing a study. And this is why you see a lot of congressional language about studies and reports, a lot of report language. It's to try to gain some insights of where the Department of Defense is thinking of going. And so that report, or constraining. So, hey, I want to retire all the F-22s. Like, okay, well, Congress says you have to do a report before you do anything within 45 days, and it has all these different report requirements. Like, we want to know all this stuff. And so it gives Congress the some insights into that, but it also makes the Department of Defense do their homework. Turns out we make a lot of decisions with no data behind them, or very little data. We have some, people have scar tissue and experiences. Everyone has experiences when you get to the point of working in the Pentagon, to include some very senior leaders. And turns out a lot of decisions are made based on their feelings. So having that conversation of like, hey, you can't say that. You're like, well, I don't like the F-22 because a long time ago this happened and I want to get rid of them. Like, no, you can't do that. Yeah. Obviously, that's an extreme example, but you kind of get the point. So that's why I worked for the Secretary of the Air Force. So I did that for about a year and a half, 2 years or so. And I actually spent some time on the Joint Staff. So I worked for General Dunford. So in the chairman's kind of congressional affairs side. Which is really interesting as well. So a lot of senior leader interactions, and it's really interesting to kind of sit down with the Secretary of the Air Force, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force as a major, and kind of go through talking points and I'm in my job I had the entire fighter portfolio, so I could tell you every program and every weapon system and what's going on and where all the dead bodies are buried, and really what are the opportunities, right? So how can we help you? That's always the kind of the big leap behind.
Well, I think I think this topic is kind of like an entire podcast in and of itself, because so many times I have all these questions, and I'm smart enough now to know that I don't know, but you're like, why do we buy things over other things? Why does it seem like we can't have a long-term plan? Because it seems like every so often we have this variability where we are not following through on stuff, like we didn't buy as many Raptors as we were going to. We're probably not going to buy as many 35s as we were going to. And what would you say is the most glaring issue, or something that you saw was either good or bad there that you didn't know before you got there?
The amount of people in that building. So back up a little bit. So the Pentagon was built before World War II. Okay. And it was built, and there's the history behind it. I can't remember the exact number, but it was that whole building. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's not a small building, and it was built in like a year. Like that whole building, from breaking ground to like people in the office. It was a year and a half. It was something ridiculous, and it was built to basically house the staff for World War II. And World War II, we had millions of people in the military. So if you look at the size of the force now. What difference between that? I'll get this has a point to it. Trust me. So you look at the size of the force now; it's orders of magnitude smaller, and we're enabled by computers, which didn't exist back then. And so, do you think we have more people or less people in the Pentagon today than we did when it opened?
I would hope we have a lot less people.
We have a lot more people. That is correct. Way more. We have so many people actually assigned to the Pentagon. They don't fit in the Pentagon. So we actually have the Department of Defense has entire office buildings in Crystal City and over across the river in Bowling for overflow because there's so many people assigned to the Pentagon. Why is that? And I tell you that to tell you this, that the amount of pockets of excellence and stovepipes in that building is amazing. And so it was fascinating for me to have a job where it was a kind of a cross-cutting functional job. So I didn't have to, I could go and talk to the A3 people about operations and things like that. I could go talk to the A4 about maintenance and logistics. I could go talk to the 5 about strategy. I could go talk to the 8 about programming and where the money is and where it's not, and kind of paint collectively, kind of figure out what is the actual picture, what's the truth. So there's only a few places on the air staff in the Pentagon that has that kind of cross-cutting functionality to be able to like, what is the actual truth of what's going on this particular topic. No one really has all the pieces of the puzzle. And so what I enjoyed about my job is kind of going around and finding all those pieces of the puzzle. And you'd think it would, computers and stuff would help, but it really doesn't.
Well, I feel like it's probably like a standard military base. You just need to walk over to their shop and look them in the eye, because it turns out phones get unanswered, emails get unreturned. You're like, man, it's a lot easier when you can just walk to their room and say like, hey, we need to get this done. It's funny that the building is so full, considering that all I got told in every fighter squadron and every MAGCOM I was in was, hey, we can't get any 11Fs to fill these staff gigs. And you're like, well, if we're not filling any of these staff gigs, then why are there so many people in the building? It seems like there's probably a lot of lack of getting stuff done, maybe.
Yeah, there's definitely room for improvement from the personnel side. I'll say that.
It's a nice way to say it.
There's definitely room for improvement. But I also say that it's absolutely critical that you do have operators that go to those kind of staff positions. Because if if you don't want to go do it, someone else is going to have to go do it. And so, you might not like their decisions because their decisions have no information behind them because they don't have any idea what they're doing. So there are certain jobs that absolutely need to be filled that are filled, but they're filled by the wrong person because we can't fill those types of positions. So the rated manning document, the RMD that comes out every year, that kind of manages that a little bit. Even that has its own, dirty history of making up positions so it looks like our manning is a different percentage so we can advocate for this. And it's a lot of inside baseball that happens when you get to that kind of stuff.
Well, that's when I learned it actually relatively young. At my first assignment in Japan, I was talking to a guy who's working at Pako in Hawaii, and he was like, yeah, the A3, which is ops, right? So the guy who makes decisions for A3 acquisitions. So it's like, hey, what, are we going to get a new radar for the Viper? Or are we going to get HEMIX for whatever? He's like, that guy is a 135 pilot. And he's like, because none of you guys will go. And that's when I realized, like, I've said this a couple times, like if fighter pilots are good at anything else, it's cutting off their nose despite their face. Like it is like, I'm going to be a real good fighter pilot and that's about it. And then everything else, like, be damned. And then what you end up finding is you end up having more problems to solve and even more difficult ones to solve because you have old jets and you have busted products. And it's because nobody it's not even falling on the sword. It's like just doing the right thing and filling these spots and actually making it better. Because you could probably, and tell me if you would agree with this, you can probably do more good for the bros and more good for the people in the squadrons by doing those things and being a good advocate rather than just like, hey, I'm just going to hang out and have fun in the roll calls and go fight.
Yeah. There's a podcast you did recently. You were talking about how you were trying to do all this stuff at Holloman, I think it was. And as you were leaving, all the stuff was showing up and you're like, yeah, it wasn't about me. It's about the next guy. Right. And so if you take that kind of vignette and you just, magnify it, if everyone just stayed in the squadrons, you'd be really good at winning today's war. You will absolutely guarantee we lose tomorrow's war because the decisions and things that we're doing for force structure, investments, that will build this future force that your replacement will be flying and operating in. Like, who's going to make those decisions?
Yeah. And I wish I could say that I didn't know. I wish I could say like, I never knew this was reality. I knew that it was the reality as like a old lieutenant, young captain. And I was just like, I don't believe you, and they just kept flying, flying jets and doing the thing. Cause that's what I wanted to do. And I finally got a little older and understood that there's goodness in doing something other than just flying the airplane and being really good at that. There's goodness in doing all of the secondary and tertiary things, because that is important. Like, it is important, like you said, because it's not today, it's not next month, it's not even next year, it's a decade, it's 5 years, it's that timeline where you are behind the power curve and you don't even know it, because you won't even lift your nugget up to look beyond like tomorrow's BFM sortie. So that's kind of what got me into doing this. Is I want to take the opportunity and understand what I've learned, and then do something different rather than just doing what I've done for a decade or so. Make a change. So we'll kind of bring it all back around. Did you come up with something? I know we've been talking about a lot of stuff. What was a surprise good deal for you in all the jobs you got to do?
When I got my my assignment to DC, I was going to go work for a senator, and so when I went to DC, I purposely avoid politics. We're politically agnostic, right? I had ignored politics for so long in my adult life. Even when I got the assignment and I got to DC, when people like terms that you think that were pretty common, like red versus blue, left versus right, like I literally have no idea what that means. They're like, what? Like how did you get this assignment? Like, how could you work in Congress and not even understand the very basics?
Yeah.
Like, because I ignored it on purpose my entire adult life. There's a reason why, right? Because it devolves very quickly into Anyway, so I didn't think I was going to like that assignment whatsoever, and I didn't know anything about it, and I ended up really enjoying that assignment because I learned a lot. I learned a lot about politics, obviously, but I also learned that we talk about like hey, you serve your country in uniform. Like, man, let me tell you, there are people on the other side of the river in that building with the funny dome on top that man, like they are some real patriots because they get paid not a whole lot of money, and the amount of work and stuff they're responsible for is ridiculous, and they're doing it because that's how they're serving their country. And so whether they spend a year there or 10 years there or 30 years, it was really interesting to see, and I'm really fortunate to have interacted with as many people as I did when I was on the Hill. So that's one of those things. I didn't think I was going to hate it, or I thought I was going to hate it, and I really enjoyed the experience.
Well, that's good, because I feel like as somebody who hasn't been there, who only gets information through all these different avenues, and you're like, who knows what's reality, and who knows if they're good dudes, bad dudes, or whatever. So that's good to hear that somebody who's actually been there has something good to say. One last question, and I'll let you get going. We kind of haven't hit this side, but it's so acquisitions. I feel like I've talked a lot about SBIRs and the innovation side and AFWorks and all that. What have you seen over the years? Old acquisitions, new programs, SBIRs, all that kind of stuff. Do you see that we're going in the right direction, or do you think we need to change and improvise and adapt to actually be effective in our innovation and kind of moving forward?
That's a multi-hour answer.
Yeah, I have to have you back.
Just my opinion. So parting shot here's an hour.
No, take your time. All you need.
Yeah, here's what I'll say. I'll say that the process, you have to. The process is why things are the way they are. And so when we went to the, what PPBE is? That's basically the process that runs the entire Department of Defense for its planning, programming, budgeting, and execution. And that system was built out in the 60s. I want to say it was like the mid 60s. And that's the process we still use. And that broke things down into like line items. This is why you have budget line items. And then when it goes to Congress, that line item, people move money between the line items. and it's very, the budget request is thousands of pages long, huge amounts of books, because all these line items here, line item for that. Like the F-16 is broken out. It's like all kinds of different line items depending on what you're doing, and the process to build the budget for all those different line items takes 18 to 24 months. So right now, recording this, that's July of 2022. The 2024 budget for the Department of Defense is being wrapped up. So when you think, so between now and then, I'm sure some technology will present itself, and there'll be an opportunity like, hey, the warfighter could use this. Yeah, I'm sure they can. It's not in the budget. So really it goes back to the process. There's ways there's certain things you could do to fix that. There's different authorities and stuff to kind of rapidly acquire things. They're not used as much as you probably would think, even though Congress wrote the authorities, because the role of oversight. So if certain programs we have, you can do a sole source, uncontestable, like rapid acquisition contract. It's written in law, you can do it. But if you do it too much, Congress won't like it. If you don't do it enough, someone else in Congress will say, do more of these. And so you're like, oh my God, like, why don't you just tell me how many you want me to do? Or give me like a cap. How much money a year can I spend with this authority? Like that doesn't exist. But it's a very year by year kind of, temperature of the water. Because, the step one in government is if you lose a contract in the military, your competitor just files a protest, and then you just lost, 8 months of legal paperwork, and now no work happens, right? Or you don't get the budget on time because the Pentagon, really, we all run off of fiscal years, and we have different colors of money. Most of the money we have is 1 year money, and so it goes away at the end of the year if we don't obligate it. And so you've seen this, just like flying our program closeouts, because that's 1 year money, and the amount of just complete wholesale abuse of taxpayer dollars the last 4 to 6 weeks of every fiscal year within the government is insane. And it's all driven off of a system because it's going to expire. If they would say, hey, you can roll that over for another 6 months into the next fiscal year before it expires, like, oh, okay, well, now I have 18 months to execute. And the reason why that's probably important is because we don't get the money on time to begin with. And so if it's only 1 year money, and Congress, as if my math is right, has only passed appropriations to actually give us money when the year starts twice in the past 15 years on time. So when you lose 3 to 4 months out of your 12 months waiting on Congress to give you the money, and then the money they give you expires in 7 or 8 months, that leads to all kinds of contract delays. So your defense industrial base is waiting to get on contract to do work. And so you'll see these flurries of checks and contracts starting to get people, working. But the first quarter of every fiscal year is like the most useless quarter because it's usually under a continuing resolution. There's no money. For a dude in the fighter squadron, all he knows is like, I don't know, it's a new, my flying hour program closeout last month, which is hell, is over. I have a clean slate to screw around for a month or two before I have to get real serious about sorties and hours. But for the big macro level, like huge systemic problems. And that drives all kinds of weird things. We can talk about AFWERX and SBIRs, and those are all different programs that are federally, SBIRs federally funded. AFWERX basically white labels SBIRs to do innovation with, but it's all the same federal funding.
Yeah, I think that's a frustrating thing, and I kind of learned as the years went on. At first, I didn't see the trend, and then after a few years, it's, hey, we don't have any money, will this TDY get funded or not because it's in the first quarter of the fiscal year or even in the second quarter of the fiscal year. And then there's kind of some spending in the squadrons. And then as the summer kind of hits, you lose funding in the squadrons because the wings, everybody kind of like pulls those dollars back uphill because they don't want to overspend. But we've barely been spending money for a couple months. And then you get to that August, September time. And then it's like, holy cow, we didn't spend, 60% of our money. What are we going to spend it on? And then you just have squadrons with 80-inch TVs everywhere. And you're like, this is ridiculous.
Because that money has all kinds of restrictions on it too. It's like when I have a different problem. What I really need is I need 10 new computers because these are like 5-year-old computers. Like, well, you have to go through this Air Force process to actually buy a computer. You can't just go and buy it from like the same place the Air Force is going to buy it. You have to go through this middleman, and that's going to take 6 months of process. Like, I don't have 6 months. My money expires in 4 months. What I can do, though, is I can buy computer monitors, office furniture, and TVs. And that's why every military unit at the end of the year goes on a shopping spree and buys computer monitors, office chairs, and TVs. Yeah. But they don't buy computers because the computer is different kind of money, different process. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's bad. And I think that's where, I mean, so much breakage is. And I talked to some companies and they're like, oh man, like we're not sure if we're going to get the funding or anything. And I was like, give it a couple months. Like, who knows? People will start calling because they get phone calls from their boss and and people start calling downhill. And then all of a sudden there's all this funding that needs to get spent. And you're like, so who knows what the funding is going to look like at the end of the year, or how much we're actually going to spend, because for most of the year, a lot of it doesn't get allocated, which it is way easier said than done. I guarantee it. But that would be a great thing to fix in creating a better way that they allocate funds and are able to allocate funds to the things they actually need versus just allocating funds so we don't lose them for the future is that would be very desirable for the person on the end of the whip.
So one thing I'll end on, and we can hop off for the day. I'm sure listeners are tired of listening to me. One of the things you talk about innovation, and here's why. And AI and innovation are those two words I really don't like. I don't like the word innovation. It's gotten used and abused. Here's what I'll say. Like, innovation happens when you have basically three things that are kind of aligned, right? So you have unique insights to a problem. You have the ability to solve that problem. Maybe it's a technological solution or something. And you have the resources to execute that. So you have to know the problem, have a solution, and have the resources. That is not aligned in most places within the Air Force, right? So your wing commander doesn't have the same money to actually solve the problems in his wing, right? He has no budget authority. He's given an operating budget to keep the lights on that he has to manage. And one of the reasons why they hold that money back, which you learn when you get older, like, oh, like that's all the money for the whole year. So if you're in like North Carolina, you have to weather through hurricane season. And so you're going to keep more money set aside to like clean the base up if hurricane hits, or all these other things that like, oh, because if I don't have that money, I can't do it. So I can't obligate money that I haven't, that's not in my account, if you will, right? Like there's no credit card for that in the government. So they keep that reserve to get through, in this case, hurricane season on the East Coast. And then as it turns out, like, hurricane season is winding down when the fiscal year is winding down. And so now they're like, spend your money. Yeah. So it's really fascinating when you look at that, the disconnect between, resources, authorities, and, insights of the actual like operating problem. If you could fix that, whether it's like a mission capital fund or something like that. And we do have a little bit of that, but it's called CRF. There's a commander's readiness fund. Every commander gets some money a year, but it's not very much money. It's enough to, again, buy some monitors, some TVs, or computer chairs. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the only thing I have to say is like about that is a lot of these innovation things are relatively small amounts of money. They're not, some of them are asking for millions, but they're like, hey, can I get 80 grand, 100 grand? And sometimes that's available. And if they have those like CR funds, like that would be, I think that's what is changing it. And I think Luke has been doing a great job with that, of just like, we found some money, we're going to put it towards this program for a year and then see where we go. Because we have to make those small bets and keep pushing, because if we don't, it's tough. But so before we get going, can you, if you want people to contact you or whatever, where would you like them to reach out?
Yeah. So you can check out the website from a newsletter. It's themerge.co. And you can reach me on there through news@themerge.co. That's probably the best place. Sign up for my newsletter and you get smarter. If not, you'll stay dumb.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the podcast, Pako. Everybody, thank you again for listening. And remember, go to the contact me at vader@kodiakshack.com. Check out our website, kodiakshack.com. And then if you do like the content and everything, please donate through our website or the show notes so we can keep the podcast going. Thanks again, Pako.
Thanks, Vader.
See ya.